Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one with a spooky flavor because it is October, a month for spooky things. The book is about monsters and monster slayers. I am referring to Beowulf, which has no author. So normally, this would be the part where I would talk about the author, their credentials, and what else they've written, and just jaw on about how much I hate them or how much I adore them. But that's kind of hard to do with Beowulf because nobody knows who wrote Beowulf. The author is just most often referred to as the Beowulf poet because there's no way to identify who they were. It was published so long ago, and it's unknown who wrote it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, specifically with an issue that I have with the story. But more often than not, the person who wrote it is just attributed to whoever translated the story. You end up with some pretty big names translating Beowulf over the years. J.R.R. Tolkien, the writer of the Lord of the Rings series, even has a translation floating around out there. And it's largely noted that Beowulf influenced Lord of the Rings, which I can see because I've read the Lord of the Rings series, and I can definitely see some influences there. My version is one of the most more widely known translations. It is Francis B. Gummere, who was noted for writing about folklore and poetry, and he is known as having one of the best translations because he managed to capture the alliteration that exists in the original text. Not the best, but better than most. Not much to say about Francis B. Gummere, other than, he did this and wrote some other things. But he seemed to be largely an academic, not really focused on writing books or poetry himself, although he did, but that doesn't seem to be his main goal. So without further ado, because I can't really talk about the author, I'll just talk about the summary and then move on to an analysis, and we will move on from there. So Beowulf takes place long ago in the Scandinavian lands. In one of the kingdoms in these lands, Hrothgar's kingdom, he suddenly finds his mead halls under attack by a disgusting, gross monster named Grendel. Grendel is described as being a descendant of Cain and is very much happy with biting and eating and attacking some of Hrothgar's best men. So he asks for help, and who answers the call but Beowulf of Geatland, which is an area in modern-day Sweden. He offers his skill. I believe he's some sort of warrior prince who is offering his hand at fighting monsters. And he sleeps in a mead hall, and when Grendel goes to attack at night, Beowulf jumps up and starts fighting off the monster, and he manages to slice off its arm. And it runs away, but it goes and dies in its swampy sort of area. And everyone celebrates. Beowulf kind of uses the Grendel's arm as a decoration, which seriously angers Grendel's mother, who is, another gross type monster who is, who I guess sort of haunts or hangs out in this kingdom type area. So anyway, Grendel's mother shows up to one of the celebrations and slaughters a whole bunch of Hrothgar's men, including some of his most trusted confidants. So Hrothgar is pretty sad and laments to Beowulf, and Beowulf ends up volunteering to go slay Grendel's mother as well. And he brings a bunch of men to sort of a lake area where one of his men who gives him a sword, either for good reasons or because he's a coward. There's a lot of debate in the text about why he's given this pretty interesting sword. And so like Beowulf jumps in the water, goes to an underground cavern area, and is attacked by Grendel's mother. She is pretty powerful and almost manages to kill Beowulf, but Beowulf's armor is what saves him, and he manages to successfully defeat Grendel's mother, although his sword is like pretty much broken in the process of battle. And once he surfaces, everyone celebrates again, and he is rewarded by Hrothgar, who reminds him to reward his thanes in the near future if he ever gets power. Beowulf at this point becomes king, and he's noted to be a very peaceful king, and people are afraid to attack his kingdom, and he reigns for about 50 years, at one point, a slave ends up stealing some valuable gold from a dragon's hoard, which results in the dragon getting infuriated and starting to attack people in Beowulf's kingdom. He grabs some men and goes to fight the dragon, but when he gets there, he tells his men to hang back or to flee into the forest so that he can fight the dragon on his own. The men do as he says, but one of his men, Wilf, turns around and goes to fight the dragon with Beowulf. Unfortunately, Beowulf gets wounded and dies in battle, and Wilf laments that the other men were kind of cowards once they start returning because they should have fought alongside Beowulf. The entire, Geatland sort of kingdom mourns for Beowulf, and they have a funeral pyre, and they also build some commemoration stones or something like that in order to preserve Beowulf's memory. It kind of ends on a sad note because the narrator notes that Geatland is now like vulnerable to attack because of one of their bravest warriors is gone. So it kind of ends on a sad note there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with this story. It's pretty straightforward, though. There's not like too much hidden underneath, as this is just an epic poem that focuses on proclaiming how great Beowulf is, as though it's sort of like a funeral eulogy or something like that. This man was a hero. He lived and he died. I could buy that. Like Beowulf could very well be a real person, but they maybe exaggerated a bit about what he did. But that said, I don't think historians have noted a Beowulf ever existing in this region that they're talking about. So who really knows? But one thing that the unknown author talks about is like heroism. They essentially define what it means to be a hero in this story. In order to be a hero, one fights monsters, one fights bravely. They don't flee at the sight of like terrible odds. Like when Grendel's mother attacks Beowulf and almost kills him, like he keeps fighting. He doesn't let the monsters simply kill him. But also to be a hero, you got to be noble and peaceful, not seeking fights where one doesn't have to seek fights. Like instead of attacking his neighbors when he's king, Beowulf like just rules peacefully, and it's a peaceful time for the people of Geatland. And there's another quote that I would like to read to you from this. We hear, thou knowest, if sooth it is, the saying of men, that amid the Scyldings a scathing monster, dark ill-doer in dusky night, shows terrific his rage unmatched, hatred and murder. To Hrothgar I in greatness of soul would succor bring, so the wise and brave may worst his foes. And right there you have Beowulf pretty much offering his services in fighting Grendel. So he's being brave here. This is someone painting a picture of someone who doesn't have to fight this monster because Hrothgar's kingdom is far away, but he's choosing to do so because he is a brave and talented fighter. And I think the author is trying to get at this is what all heroes should look like. Also, Beowulf at the end of the story takes on the dragon alone. He sends his men away. which both highlights how he's willing to not let his men die in a fight that he might lose, but it's also highlighting, how the men aren't heroes because they're willing to walk away from such a fight, and they leave one of their own behind in the process. So it's in the process you get like both of those, like what is a hero and what isn't a hero. So I like that about this story. Another thing I really like about this story is the alliteration. It's been noted by many critics that the alliteration within Beowulf is like very strong throughout the entire story, and it's been one of the hardest things to pull out as they're doing the translation, because it's there, but maybe it's hard to translate into English and other languages. But it's very, very strong throughout the entire story. Allow me to read you an example from this. But comfort and help war wheel weaving to wader folk. The master gave that by might of one over their enemy all prevailed, by single strength. In sooth 'tis told that highest God o'er humankind hath wielded ever. Thro' wan night striding came the walker in shadow. Warriors slept whose hest was to guard the gabled hall. All save one. 'Twas widely known that against God's will the ghostly ravager, and it goes on. But you can hear in that the alliteration that takes place, like using the same letter words like 3-4 times in each sentence. It makes it a lot of fun to read and helps the poem flow real smoothly throughout. And I think that's one of the reasons it stood the test of time, is because it's easy to read and it's fun to read, and it really flows, possibly for musicians to sing ballads about it or something. But it really stands out, and it really indicates that this was present in the Old English version of the poem, or whatever version came first. Like, the person who was writing it had to be, had to have a lengthy vocabulary or something like that, or like had to know what they were doing. And so maybe that offers some clue about who wrote it, although I'm sure people could say like anyone could write it, like even an uneducated person can use alliteration. So who knows? It does leave like a little mystery for why they chose to use so much alliteration, though. Well, the other thing that I talk about that I like, but also I have issues with, is the Christian imagery in this poem. So you get a lot of that in the poem. You get a lot of discussion of God or the Lord. You get talks of like heroes ending up in heaven. Grendel is described as a descendant of Cain. So a lot of talk about a murderer, a noted murderer, because in the story of Cain and Abel, Cain murdered Abel, and so Grendel is the result of this. But something that's always stood out to me is the description of like Grendel's mother as Grendel's mother. And I've always wondered, like, why would you need to specify that this monster is the mother of Grendel? Like, couldn't you just say Grendel's wife? Couldn't you just say like something else associated with Grendel? Like, this is another monster that exists in the same area. Why do you need to specify that a monster has a mother? Like, it's very weird and unusual, but it's always stood out to me. And as I was reading this and seeing the Christian imagery, I'm thinking, is this monster like a comparison to Eve or something? Because Eve, like, she released evils into the world or something by eating the apple in the Garden of Eden. So is Grendel's mother Eve, or a byproduct of Eve doing that action? I don't know. I'm sure you'd have to go to a specific, like, very knowledgeable critic about that to find it out. But I do think the imagery is there that you could make that kind of comparison. Now, I do say I like this, but to some extent it does seem kind of weird, because knowing what I know about the history of Europe and this specific region, it does seem kind of weird that in a time of that's strong with paganism, there would be so much discussion of God and heaven. Like, it doesn't seem like this is what was happening in those kingdoms in Europe at the time. You'd think they'd still be leaning towards Scandinavian religions or Norse religions or something like that. And so I have to wonder, was this Christian imagery added later? Like, the story was written, around 700, 800, something like that, those years. And it was later published somewhere around like the year 1000. And maybe it was told by one group of people, like pagans, but perhaps the church intercepted it because they knew it was a common story, and they decided to write it out with Christian imagery, thereby perverting the very nature of Beowulf. I can't prove that, and I don't think any of the historians can prove that right now. But that does seem like something the church would do in order to firmly establish like God as like the be all end all creator, rather than these group of pagans who are fighting bravely. Like, they may seem tough, but they're even below God. Which is maybe something else the writer wants you to consider. I don't know. If you can think of anything about that, comment below. I would love to hear from you about this. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Beowulf by an unknown author. If you read this before, you simply want to comment on my review, I would love to hear from you again. Let's talk about Beowulf and the mystery of its origins. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Beowulf and possibly read it during this October season. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and warrior travels. Farewell.